All right, we're gonna start it. Good afternoon to NYC, okay? All right, so today we're gonna introduce our QNAP HA high availability solutions. So on today's webinar, you will see our new HA solution and then also our current HA solution. And Deval will also introduce the live demo and then also how to set it up. Okay, so let's start it. So these are agendas. First of all, the introduction, what is high availability, and then also product overview, and then you will see, the setup and live demo, and we're gonna have a question Q&A section. Okay. So right now, for any kind of business, the biggest concern is on expecting downtime from, their hardware failure, right? So per study, there's like a 400 billion or 9% of the profit has been lost annually due to digital environment failing unexpectedly. Okay, and then the average cost of downtime is around 88,000 per hour, and then it equals almost 1,500 per minute. Okay, so we will see that it's very important for the high availability. And then what is high availability? High availability is actually a infrastructure which is configured to deliver quality performance and handle different loads and failure with minimum or even zero downtime. And it's also, in terms that refer to a systems that has ability to assist and reliable close to the 100% of the time. It must be able to withstand outage, including the scheduled downtime. So it's very important also when you have a scheduled downtime and site-wide disasters. So, HA is not just to prevent, it's also you can, schedule the downtime to do maintenance and then all kind of activity for your digital environment. Okay, so what could cause the service interruptions? Basically, of course, we all know with network failure and the power failure, and then also like the hardware failure. Okay, so here is what HA architecture is. So previously we have the dual controller model, which is the ES model. I think a lot of you guys should be familiar with them already. And now we also have these active passive HA solutions. Okay, so you will need two identical QNAP NAS, and then there will be a heartbeat in the middle, and then it will be the active passive HA. Okay, so the difference between these two is basically the dual controller model is more for your virtualization or your iSCSI, all this storage management, right? And then for the heartbeat, the active passive HA, you can actually also cover your applications, all the different apps, in this case. Okay. So these are the comparison chart right here, and the topics that you will be paying attention is like the active passive one. We can also do the applications, and then also you'll see the recovery time on the dual controller model. It's only 30 seconds, but with the heartbeat it's about 50 seconds, a little bit longer. Okay, so Deval will start to introduce more detail on the HA.
Thank you very much, Cliff. All right, so this is our new very requested feature that we are introducing today is our active passive standby HA system. So now we can actually set up HA on two different units and doesn't have to be on a single unit, which is like our ES unit. On ES unit, as you can see, you need to have a single NAS, which has two controllers inside of it, but it's mainly for enterprise level users where they need, it's mostly for virtualization storage for NFS, Samba services, iSCSI services, but mainly for storage environments where you need high availability storage. But with our new active passive HA, you can actually set up HA on two separate NASs, and then you can achieve active passive HA as well. So if one of the NAS goes down, the other NAS will take over the services automatically without having to intervene. So you don't have to come to the NAS and switch over. Everything is automatic. The recovery time, as mentioned here, is about a minute on active passive HA, and on dual controller, it's on 30 seconds. So pretty fast on dual controller, but that again is mainly for enterprise. And then since it's an active passive HA, it's about 50 seconds of recovery time when switching over the system. Now, how does the HA work, right? We have real-time protection on our systems. So if you have SMB services, iSCSI services, if you have any application running on the QNAP devices, that will keep running on node A, which is active, and there will be a heartbeat connection connected directly to node B, which is the second NAS, that does two things. One, it checks the connection to the second NAS, and also does a real-time snap sync to copy all the data block by block, so your second NAS has all the data replicated. So let's say if the active NAS goes down, the passive NAS will take over the control and keeps your services online. The IP address does not change, the networking does not change, everything keeps the same. You can use it to mitigate unexpected risk. So any power failures at the NAS level, or network failure at the NAS level, CPU or hard drive failure at the NAS level, everything is switched over to NAS B, and NAS B is now the primary NAS and still will take over. It's automatic failovers with your services within 60 seconds. So you don't have to worry about coming to the NAS and switching over. Everything happens automatically. So the way it works before this active passive, what we used to recommend is real-time snap sync. So you have to do a real-time snap sync of your data. So if you have a production server, then the primary NAS is the storage for the production server. Now, without the active passive, the way you achieve HA is manually, right? You have to do a real-time snap sync connected to the secondary NAS. And then once the primary NAS fails over, you need to go to production NAS, switch over the IP address to the secondary NAS, and everything starts to happen. But with the new HA, everything is all automatic. You still need to do snap sync, but that's all happening automatically, and we can show that in the live demo as well. Now, so on this slide, we are looking at how the traditional HA or how high availability on other systems work. Specifically, those are using DRBD technology, or distributed replicated block device. So in this diagram, you can see two systems. On the left, you can see that main system downloading file information to the file. The data goes to the file system, then the buffer cache, and then at the DRBD level. At the DRBD level, it connects to the networking, and then it replicates the data at the DRBD level. So because this replication happens at the block level, the system does not understand what files are being replicated. It just means that the raw data can lead to inefficiencies or complexity, especially during recovery or failover. So while this setup provides redundancy, it considers a legacy system today because it lacks file system awareness. Because it does not know about your file system, it does not know if there's any the metadata changes or anything like that. So there may be some, when it replicates the data, the metadata will be different on the replicated data. On the new system, which is what we are using, it's based off CFS's real-time snap sync, so which is what we use. On both sides, you can see the two systems running full ZFS stack, which makes it powerful, and it's a built-in integration between file system and replication process. So you can see at traditional object layer, it replicates all the data to the second NAS. So in real-time snap sync, it's the QNAP allows to replicate the data between two systems in real time at the file system level, not just at block level like DRBD. So it knows what changes are happening at the file level, so it can replicate those changes, including the metadata at the file level system. So here we are comparing this to another HA system. So the first thing is, when using Samba services, you can see that on QNAP systems, The metadata of your system, the MD5 checksum, is the same between QNAP devices, but when you look at the MD5 structure on the DRBD systems, they're actually different. So if your application is really critical and requires to be having the same metadata, then the system may fail because it's a different metadata, a different MD5 system. Similarly for iSCSI as well, and the QNAP systems, your metadata is the same, whereas on other systems you can see that it's a different MD5 system. It's a different checksum, basically. So high reliability with the heartbeat connection. So the way this works is that you have two NASs. They are directly connected to each other, and you can also set up port trunking as well. It's not a requirement, but you can set up as port trunking as well. So if the NAS one goes, so in a normal scenario, all your data has been copied to the active NAS, and active NAS then does a snap sync in the background to the passive NAS. Let's say, for example, if the active NAS goes down, the passive NAS takes over. You can also connect a witness server to make sure that both to understand which NASs are online and which NASs are offline. And I can talk. I'll let you know why you require a witness server. A witness server is required when there is an HA, when there's a split brain in your HA. What does split brain means? So let's say, for example, both NASs are online and there was a disconnection between both NASs, like the heartbeat connection went down. So that's where split brains happen, which means that more NASs are trying to be the active NAS. So in this scenario, there may be some issues that may happen. So in this scenario, you want to have a witness server, also called as quorum server, which could be your DNS server or which could be the DHCP server on your network. Now that could be your router. So once you set up that, the quorum server determines which will be the active NAS or which will be the passive NAS, or you can select which will be the active NAS in that scenario, and then which will be the passive NAS. So you can keep the main NAS as active NAS, and the passive NAS will be the second NAS. That's where it only happens when there's a split brain scenario where both NASs are running fine. It's just that the disconnect happened between the heartbeat connections where both NAS thinks that the other NAS is offline and they're trying to take over the control. So other methods of maintaining high availability is that obviously this happens between both NASs, right? But you also want to make sure that both NASs are connected to UPS. So in case if there's a power failure at your location, your systems are still online using the backup battery. Also make sure that if you have the ability to have redundant power supply on the rack mount units, make sure both power supplies are connected. In ZFS systems, we want to ensure that you have ZIL intent login. So this is crucial part of ZFS's file system base, right? When you write data, ZIL temporarily logs it to protect against power loss. So if the power goes out during mid-write, your data is still safely committed and can be recovered when the system comes back online. So you want to use SSD as ZIL intent log. So in case if there's any abrupt power failure, your data is still safe. Now there are two scenarios when there is a power when you want to have two systems, right? There's failover and there's switchover. Failover is when there's something that's not in your hands, right? A network failure that happens, a power failure that happens, or a hardware failure. A network failure is in case of the main NAS, the network cable breaks down, or network port breaks down, then the NAS goes offline. That's where the NAS will switch over to the second NAS. When the other thing is power failure, there's an issue with the power supply of the NAS, or there's an issue with the power, the maybe the wall jack that supplying the power to the main NAS just breaks out. So there's no power to the main NAS. Now that's where the switchover will happen. Or there's a hardware failure. There's a CPU issue, RAM issue, multiple drives that have failed. That's where the failover will happen and the NAS will switch to the second NAS. So those are the failover scenarios, right? What is switchover? Switchover is when you control the switching over between both NASs, right? Routine maintenance, where let's say if you just want to reboot, because there are many users who do reboot every few months, right? Maybe every 6 months, maybe every 1 year. So you can do a routine maintenance where you want to reboot the NAS. You can switch over, then reboot both NASs where all your services are online. It just reboots one at a time, and the NAS will switch back and forth when the reboot happens. System upgrades. When you have a new firmware that you want to upgrade, instead of losing, right now, if you have a single NAS and you want to update the software, you have to reboot the whole NAS, right? Because no, to complete the system firmware update, you need to reboot the device. Otherwise, the firmware update never happens. So in the HA scenario, what will happen is that the NAS will switch over first, then upgrade the firmware on the main NAS. When switch it back over, upgrade the firmware on the second NAS, reboot everything. Reboot after the firmware upgrade on the main NAS, and then switch over to the main NAS, and then reboot, updates the firmware on the second NAS, reboot the second NAS. So everything happens smoothly, and all your services are online, and there's no disconnect even when you're updating the software. And lastly, disaster recovery testing. You just want to test your disaster recovery. You manually unplug the cable, or you try to reboot the device uh, physically. You just want to test it. That's where switchover will happen. You can do that all automatically as well. So here's some definitions of switchover and automatic failure as well. So again, switchover again is where you want to test something, update the software, perform routine maintenance. You can do a switchover. It's a smooth transition to ensure the business is there's continued business transactions, or your business is online all the time. Failover is unplanned, where you have a hardware failure, a power failure, network failure, or system crashes or anything like that. The switchover will happen when the NAS will then switch over to fail over to the second NAS. It's minimum downtime and restore services automatically. So everything runs smoothly again. There may be some downtime when it's switching over. Right, so how to set up high availability. So we have a new application. First of all, you need to download our new beta version, which is QTS Hero H5.3.0. And then you need to install the application called High Availability Manager. I'll show this in the live demo. Once you install the application, you'll go through the process of setting up high availability, and we'll go through this quickly as well. After you create your high availability cluster, so now it's not two individual NASs. Once you set up the high availability, it will create a cluster where you're going to be logging into the cluster, and it will see it as one whole system. So that's where the cluster comes into play. So the cluster you will log into the cluster, and the cluster will be the one that you'll be using to access your data. You set up your SMB services, iSCSI services, everything. It won't be individual NASs anymore. Right, so and then you can check all the information about each of the NASs by logging into each of the NASs. We can check the disk information, the HA status, all of that as well. Not all applications are currently supported for HA. Right now, these are these applications that we do support for HA. What's being processed right now is virtualization station, container station, Linux station, box safe, virtual JBot. So in case if you have applications that are that you're currently using that are not listed on this particular list, I won't recommend using this new application. Wait for the application to be compatible first, and once it's compatible, only then I would recommend installing the beta version with HA. What is the system requirements for setting up HA? Both NASs have to be identical. So identical as mean down to the disk level as well. So if you have, let's say for example, if you have two 574 TXs, you need to make sure that both of them have 5 disks, same model, same version, and then both have as well. Both of them have to be H.5.3 or newer by both NASs. Both NAS has to be 8 gigabytes of memory minimum. The heartbeat connection needs to be faster than the cluster speed. So here that is important, right? So what I mean by cluster connections, so both NAS obviously have to be multiple network ports. So let's say for example, if you have a 574 TX which has two network ports, one is 2.5G, one is 10G. we recommend having the heartbeat connection. The heartbeat connection is the one that connects directly from NAS A to NAS B. So that's a direct network connection that happens between both NASs. That needs to be on a higher networking speed than the cluster connection. Cluster connection is the connection that you will be using to access the NAS. You can have to be either same or higher speed. So if you're using 10 gigabit on the cluster connection, the heartbeat needs to be 25 gigabit. If you're using 2.5 gig on the cluster connection, the heartbeat needs to be 10 gigabit connection. The best practice is always that the heartbeat connection has to be faster than the cluster connection. The current firmware does not support external expansion units. If you have external NASs that you have connected with external expansion, currently does not support that. Here are the models that we support with the new firmware as well as the new HA features. Anything X74 and above is supported. So X74 series, the 874s, the 674s, 474s, the TVS 675s, the 77 AFUs, 86, all the new rack mount units will be supported with HA. All right, so lastly, let's look at some live demos and see how it looks like. All right, first of all, so here is the here's two of my NASs right here. Let me see. So this is right, this is NAS B, or what I call is NAS B. You can assign whichever NAS A or NAS B. But this is a NAS B where I have not set up any storage spaces. So there's no RAID that is set up on NAS B, and there's no application installed. The only thing I've done is update it to the beta version, which is 5.3.0, which is already available on the website. And you do have to install a high availability application from the App Center. So you go to the App Center, look for HA, and it will pop up, and just install that. You need to install that on the second NAS. First of all, obviously you need to initialize the NAS. So you need to plug in the drives, initialize the NAS, and that's it. Just install the new firmware and just install the HA application. Once it's installed, go back to the main NAS where you're going to be doing all the setup. So here what I've done is, again, I've installed the new firmware, which is the 5.3.0, as well as I've installed the application, which is the HA, high availability. Additionally, I also set up storage manager as well. I've set up my storage space where I'm going to be setting up my RAID as well, whereas all my shared folder as well. Now, you can set up HA anytime. So let's say if you're using your NAS for a long time, if you have a lot of data, you can set up HA as well. It doesn't have to be new system on the main NAS. The main NAS can be, if you're using a main NAS, that is fine as well. The only thing is the second NAS or the passive NAS has to be cannot have any data. It will delete all the data on the passive NAS. That's the only requirement. So I've just set up my storage manager and I set up my RAID as well as my shared folder. Now let's set up HA. So I'm going to go to high availability and I'm going to start creating a new cluster. It'll just give you information about what is the requirement, right? The two NASs must be identical. The cluster connection will be connecting through the network and the heartbeat has to be connected directly. Once you have done that, hit next. Now, the other thing I need to make sure that I mention is that on the cluster connection, the IP address, the cluster connection, which I mean by the one that is connecting to your network, has to be set up as static IP. So on both my devices, I've set up static IP addresses on the main connection, which is going through your network. Same thing on the second NAS as well. Static IP addresses on both of my NASs that is connecting through my network. The heartbeat connection, I can leave it as DHCP. That is fine. And it's connected directly, so there will be no IP address there. And you can notice that the cluster connection is on a slower speed as well as the heartbeat connection has to be on a higher speed. So that I've set up that as well. Once you have done that, you can go back to high availability. You can select the cluster connection, which will be the main connection, and then the heartbeat connection, which will be the 10 gigabit connection. Once you select that, hit next. It's going to connect to the second NAS and it's going to start getting information about the second NAS. Meantime, if you have any questions about today's webinar, you can start posting them in the Q&A list, or you can actually set up you can ask the question in the chat as well. So once everything is connected properly, it's going to get you information about the IP address of the second NAS. You just have to enter the username and password of the second NAS and hit next. It's going to log into the second NAS and it's going to show you all that everything is okay and ready to go. Once it's done that, hit next. Now you need to put in the host name. This will be the host name that will be through your network. So I'm just going to say DPHA cluster. And then you need to enter the IP address that will be the static IP address on your main network. So this will be connected to the main network, right? So I'm going to just test it, make sure that the IP address is available for me to use. Seems that IP address is available. So I'm just going to put in that information, 10.15.140.207, which is on my main network. Once I've set up that, hit next. It's going to check and it's going to confirm that everything's okay. Just start to create the cluster by clicking on create. All right, so this is gonna take a few minutes. So it's gonna say the system will create the high availability cluster before proceeding. That make sure that all the services and active node will be. So make sure that nothing is being transferred. Right, no iSCSI services are running, no SMB services are running, no applications are running. You make sure that everything is stopped, so you don't lose the connection in the meantime. Okay, and then the passive node will delete all the data. So on the passive connection, which will be the second NAS, all the data will be deleted. Once you confirm that, hit OK, and it's going to start executing that, and it's going to start creating the cluster. All right, so this will take about 2 to 5 minutes to finish. So right here, you can see that it's setting up the heartbeat connection. It's going to set up the environment. It's going to stop services. It's going to configure the system settings, and it's going to start services. While this is happening, we'll go through some, and I'm going to open this to Q&A as well. Oh, in the meantime, you can see that the cluster IP address is now responding. So it's setting up the cluster IP address. So it's actually, because there's no data on my main NAS, there's nothing being replicated, because if you have a lot of data on the main NAS, at this point, it will start to transfer the data as well. So in your scenario, it may take a longer time, right? So you have to be patient at this particular level because it depends upon how much data you have. If you have a lot of data, it's going to replicate that data on the second NAS, including the storage settings, including all the applications, including all the data. So you have to give it some time to make sure that it replicates it. Because don't have any data, it's going to be a little bit faster for me. All right, in the meantime, I'm going to open this Q&A. I do see there's some Q&A section that we have received already. The first question is this session will be recorded? Yes, those will be recorded, including the PowerPoint as well. And we'll post this on a YouTube channel. And if you have provided a valid email address to us, you will receive an email address with replaying the video as well as the PowerPoint as well. Second question, can the NAS be located in another location? Well, it has to be on the same location unless you have a direct connection going to that second location. Because if you have another project where the second location is connected on the same network, connected via fiber connection. So if you can set up a direct connection, using the fiber cable, then maybe yes, then you can set it up as on a separate location. But the main networking has to be like the cluster as well as both the NASs have to be on the same network. That's the main requirement. And the heartbeat connection has to be directly connected. So you can achieve that by fiber cable going longer distances, or a copper cable at shorter distances as well. So another question, is there a reason the model needs to be same? Does it include the same exact drive? So yes, because they're setting up, because services rely on the same hardware on both devices, because you replicating virtualization in the future, containers as well, having same hardware is the main point, because that's where the cluster connect. That's where, because it's going to replicate that data, right? So it needs to be on the same network. Sorry, it has to be on the same hardware, and then also has to be the same disk, because you need to ensure that the second NAS also can handle the data from the first NAS. So everything has to be the same. All right, looks like it's all set up and good to go. So I'm going to click on leave. All right, now you're not going to be logging into the individual NASs. Now you're going to log in on the main cluster, which is the third IP address. The first IP address is NAS1. The second IP address is NAS2. And the third IP address will be the cluster IP address. And that's what you're going to start using in the future to control the NAS and everything in the future as well. All right, so now here you can see, also you need to make sure that the licenses have to be the same. So if you purchase like box safe license in the future or any additional licenses, you need to ensure that both NASs have to be the same license. So you may have to, so if you do plan to use HA, you need to start purchasing 2 licenses for in the future. So box safe licenses or any future licenses, you have to purchase 2 sets, one for the main NAS, one for the second NAS. But you can see the HA is now set up. You can see that the heartbeat connection is set up and it's good to go. So now you can see the connection, the storage pool, everything. You can see all the nodes right here, and you can see the settings, or you can check what the specifications of each of the nodes. You can reboot each node at a time, so you can switch over properly, and it's going to reboot the main NAS. You can do that, all of that as well. If you go back to the main cluster, you can manage the main cluster. You can update the firmware. You can update the HA application. You can manually switch over to the second NAS if you want to reboot the first NAS. So you switch over to the you can switch over. So I'm going to switch over right now to the second NAS. So once it's finished switching over, you can reboot the first NAS, and then you can switch back over, and then you can reboot the second NAS. When you start updating the firmware in the future, if you start seeing if you're gonna start updating the firmware in the future, it's gonna ask you a new question where do you wanna well, it's not gonna ask you questions, but it's gonna just inform you that it's gonna do a proper update of the firmware where it's gonna update the first NAS. So it's gonna switch over to the second NAS, update the first NAS, reboot the first NAS, and then it's going to switch back over from the second NAS back to the first NAS, and it's going to do the same thing to the second NAS, where it's going to reboot, it's going to update the firmware on the second NAS, reboot the second NAS, and your HA is back online. So if you have any services that are running, everything is all smooth, there's no downtime, and everything is running properly. So all your application, including like SMB services, iSCSI services, NFS services, all are kept online, and there's no issues in the future. Let me see what happens when you log into the cluster. So I'm logging into the individual NASs right now. Oh, it's actually the cluster still. So if I log into the individual NAS, what you see here is maintenance mode, which means that it's going to just show you 3 applications: the high availability manager, the QU log center, and then the notification center. But you cannot access any other settings like control panel or anything like that. There's no other application. So if you log into individual NASs, nothing can be shown here. It's only the 3 applications that are going to show you right here. This was possible. This is for basically troubleshooting. So if you have any issues with your HA cluster, you can just log in here and ensure and check what's going on using the log center. Make sure that everything is okay. If there's any issues that you can see, that that happened in the event log, you can check here as well. So right here, you can see that the active NAS is now the second NAS because I switched it over. Now the first NAS is now the passive NAS. So everything is running fine. And then I can go back here. I can switch back over and it's going to switch back over. As I mentioned, it's about minute downtime. Well, not downtime. Basically, it's going to take a minute to switch over while the services in the background keep running. All right. So that is it for our demo for today. I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint and we're going to continue with the Q&A section. All right, so let's open this forum up for any questions. So I see that few questions are already available. Are there any plans to expand how many NASs can be added to a cluster? I believe there are a few more NASs that I do plan to add in the future. But again, this is a resource intensive application, so not all lower end models will be supported. Also, there's no plan to set up HA for QTS platform. So all the NASs running QTS firmware won't be able to have this feature. Has to be QTS NASs that supports QTS Hero platform. But all the new NASs should be able to support the HA functions. And then, are you planning to use this technology to implement a basic bare metal restore backup routine for settings applications? I think Cliff brought up a new point. I think, Juna, your question is how to expand. Are there any plans to expand how many NASs can be added to a cluster? Right. No, this is HA between two systems. Right now, it's only between two systems. In the future, we do plan to have a scale out platform, which is a HA, which is having multiple nodes. That is again is planned for the future, sometime end of this year, where we're gonna have multiple nodes. You can actually have need to start with 3 nodes or 3 different NASs, and you can set up a cluster between 3 of the NASs, and you can keep adding more nodes to add more resources as well as more storage as well. So that will be our scale out platform, but that's something that will be coming in the future. But this will be only with between 2 NASs. Another question is, please share the video and document license. And I think that was a mistake on the document. So yes, there will be some the recording of this video and documentation like the PowerPoint as well. And then the license, again, the HA is actually, there's no licenses required for this particular feature. It's actually license free. There's no licensing required. You don't need to purchase any licensing as well. So there's no licenses required. Another question we have is, are you planning to use this technology to implement basic bare metal restore backup routine? No, right now I don't see that in the plans. HA, this you need to still initialize the NAS, but we do have something that we do where it's by project where we can work with you to set up like a bare metal restore as well as bare metal backup as well. Right now you can, on the new form where you can do like backups, scheduled backups as well of your settings now, so you can back up your setting as well. But no, for restore it has to be initialized right now. But I'll send out my email address. If you need more, I would need more information on what you're exactly looking for, and then we can talk more on that as well. All right, sorry about that. And then for the HCI question, Jonah, can you help me send an email address on to my email address, and then we can talk more on this one, since I will need to get more information on what you're exactly looking for, and then we can get more information as well. There's another question, is there any license required? No, there's no additional license required by this. It's all free to use for now. Another question is, if a RAID 10 system fails, for example, one of the devices, the standby device comes online. Yes, if a RAID 10 system fails, for example, on one of them, on like the active NAS, the backup NAS will take over, and then everything will still keep running normally. So you don't need to worry about that. It doesn't have to be. It could be RAID failures. It could be hardware failures. It could be network failures. everything, as long as the storage goes down, the other one will take over. Yeah, a lot of questions, a lot of people ask about the presentation recording. Yes, we'll be sharing this on our YouTube channel, as well as we'll be sending up a follow-up email to everyone as well. Any other questions? We'll wait about a minute more. There's no further questions. Thank you all for joining our webinar.